Hey guys. Yeah, Arthur, thank you. I'm feeling a little better because, well, actually, like a lot better. Like, the thing was yesterday, I was so low that I felt like all I could do was like disappoint, let down the people that cared about me, and that by allowing people to care about me, I was actually hurting them, and they felt so guilty. And it's just kind of childish to be like, you shouldn't, you shouldn't care about me because I'm ugly and worthless. And I mean, I do think I'm ugly. But, like, I feel like she's ugly, I still love her. I could have just said, like, also just as well said, "I'm bad at math, so don't care about me." I'm have this weird, like, walrus thing. Don't worry, Jerry, I love it. I love my walrus. I mean, I know why I have it, so but at the time, it's like, if you already think of me really low, you won't be shocked to be like, "Oh, she's actually ugly. I don't like her. She's actually has nothing of value to offer and not worth caring about." I wanted to just be like, "Yeah, so I encourage you to not care about me, please." Um, I d I don't want that, but I was feeling so hopeless that it was like it felt like the right thing to do, like the more, um, moral thing to do, I guess. But you get really low and your mind is like goes dark places. And oh, a black dress. I didn't know if it was some kind of a coat when I grabbed this. Um, but it actually, I didn't even intend that it'd be like the book, the chapter we're gonna start on tonight, Skin Tension Under Leatherette, chapter 2. But I do feel like it's fitting. I don't even think I managed to you scare anybody off that cared about me. Someone did get upset at me actually, but I don't think that they don't care about me. They blocked me, but I think they'll be back. They just I think they thought it was something rude against them to say that I don't want them to miss me, like, wearing high heels, and if they're not around, I just didn't, like, hear from them, so I didn't want them to feel guilty, people don't tend to get mad if they don't care about you. But, anyway, I, and I was just thinking, like, "Should I put on high heels with this?" Or I I I mean, it could go with these, um, what are they, like, stockings, um, but I saw these in the front and I thought, um that they're cute. Just thinking quick, I would maybe go well with like but I was thinking like, should I button this or not? Are you gonna see me though? So much up front. But even so, if I had like a dark black makeup or something, but I'm feeling a little better because Veronica came by today and they did the pool. And I heard because she went crazy, and seeing the state she was in, and she said she was gonna come tomorrow when we go to the hospital. So, for that was like an expected thing, like, to go back. So that doesn't mean it's anything bad and it might be good news. So, um, and just being able to see her was a relief because I haven't seen her in a week. So that was good. Oh, hi, John. Um, and that gave me and I did talk to my sister a little bit. Um, and I really think if you guys could see my sister, like talk to my sister, you would understand me so much better. So much better. Like, um, I am I'm express things different. Like, actually, last night after the show, I had such a breakdown for, like, an hour and a half. Well, let me tell you, I'm on my period now. I started right after the show. I had, like, cramps, um, and I went to put, like, I wiped and there was, like, red stuff. So then I, went to put a pair of underwear and a pad, and I, like, couldn't get it on for, like, over an hour of, like, shaking. And by the way, this you ever look up a picture of a person, not even just a woman, a person frightened, scared, and you're gonna see this. Like, even if I ask you, like, act scared right now, like, what do you this that's here. naturally. You're protecting your jugular. You're not, and I've learned this, like, as I didn't know why I did that. Go watch me the other night, like, watch something of me, right? The, where have you seen that before? This, blah, blah, blah. A person who's afraid, somewhere in my brain, PTSD, trauma, like, you're terrified. Um, and I couldn't get out of the state to even get my underwear on in my like for over an hour. I'm not joking. Like I'm telling you the truth. It was over an hour. Um and I eventually did it, a lot of pain, and I my eye started twitching later, like, and so I talked to my sister about that. I was like, actually last night my eye was twitching. And um she's like, oh my god, like this week. Actually my eye was twitching, my left eye. I don't know if you guys ever had like your eye twitching. It's like inadvertently, but it spooks you when, like, your body's doing something and your mind's not telling it to. So but your eye twitching is like something is really wrong. Like there's like a price to pay for what happened to the body. Anyway, I'm telling you, I feel that right now. I feel the weak, all my cells, but like I can maybe recover. So this will be good tonight. Reading, got my coffee. And I had sent out the video to you guys if you got it before the show, because I was getting all excited, new book. And I always like to like immerse myself and get into it. And I used to send clips like after I didn't last night the first chapter, but I thought I'm gonna look this guy. I want to know how he sounds like. Um, so what I sent to you, that was just from September. That was just from a couple months ago, I guess. But what he looks like now, but the clips, because that blinded me with science song, I bet that's gonna come up soon because that said 1982. And at this point we were in like what, 1977. Um, so it could be soon, and I thought that would give you an idea of him in more younger years, which might be sooner, and from his own voice, that this is a real person. And I think it'll be really cool. And I didn't even understand yet that that wasn't even his real name until he said that in that video. And to hear the song, like, okay, oh, thank you. It is a fun song, but I was paying attention especially to like the sounds and the crafting, because obviously I heard it when I was a kid, like, oh, I like this. But the and then when he said about music for like movies, that's going to be interesting too. But um so I'm looking forward to this tonight. I'm in a better place tonight. I'm I really I really try my best, guys, and I want you to at least understand that even if I'm not good enough, at least know, like, I really try my best. Like even today, like I feel guilty for not having like eyeliner on or something. And I did try, like, I've been up earlier. I didn't get enough sleep from the time talking to my sister, dealing also with like insurance and having to find tax. The insurance thing, it's the number that they have. Like, I don't have a lot of money, but it might look like more to, and then therefore my insurance quote is like and a price that I don't think is fair. Like I don't want like if I qualify for like a subsidy or a help with my rates, I don't want any more than is right, but I don't want less than is right, like, because I'm trying to get insurance, but I struggle talking on the phone. I struggle with this. So today I did try to work on that too, so that maybe later in the week I could try calling again and proof of like my number being different to try again and appeal. It was like a lot of stress. But so anyway, I did all that today. So even if I don't look like my best, I am trying my best. I am trying to do all these things. Thank you, Jerry. Oh, thank you, Jerry. You're blinded with love. Please say that. Let's begin chapter two. I was like, where's my phone? You just moved it over there. I'm gonna try not to show you my panties. You can try to guess what color they are, though. And I would show you on the site after, but I gotta be careful with this time of the month. Pulling you guys up. I think he seems so cool. I think I wanted to hear it in his voice more. Like, yeah. So I think now I will more. Okay. Mm. Poetry emotion. That's such a good one. And actually, I was looking for this book yesterday before the show, and I found like a really cool poetry book on my shelf I didn't know I had. And I was like, I should read some of these to you guys. Maybe I should on a date night. Get you in a romantic mood, huh? Okay. I could wear this, but could wear something more revealing there. But right now, we don't want to get bad. We want to enjoy our evening together. Mm. I was doing 3 or 4 mixing gigs a week by now, and in some decent venues too. In the first 2 months of 1978, okay, here we are, 1978, I did sound for The Fall, Gang of Four, and Blank Mange. But watching all those musicians on stage really made me desperate to get in a band in my own right. On a night off, I went to Alexandra Palace to see C and the Banshees. I completely loved them. I had recorded a 4-song John Peel session they did, and I'd been making up synth parts for their songs. I was hoping to get a cassette to them before or after the gig. They had a great doomy sound and a new look, all dripping in monochrome. Punks were usually so colorful with their tartan trousers and green mohawks. Bands like Siouxsie, I'm sure I'm saying it wrong, but I'll spell it out. Siouxsie. Yeah, I'm trying my best with that one. And The Cure were going the other way altogether. Mm, mm, mm. No, it doesn't make any sense, Terry. I don't know what that means, but okay. Uh, like tragic heroes out of a German silent horror movie, I gave my cassette to one of their roadies, but I never heard anything back. Over the following weeks, I did away with my orange spikes and cultivated a lank raven hairdo. Oh, oh. With center parting. Eventually, I decided to place a melody maker out of my own, saying I was a synth player looking for a band. And listing influences like Cabaret Voltaire, Throbbing Gristle, Her Ubu, and The Normal. The paper came out on a Thursday, and by the weekend, I had a few calls. Most were duds, but one guy that called seemed pretty interesting, and he lived close to me. I spent a few afternoons with him at his flat in East Sheen, and I was deeply impressed. His name was Bruce Woolley, a great singer and fluent rhythm guitarist with a real craft for writing catchy pop songs. I would see him switch them together, and it was like watching someone really good do the Times crossword. It was not totally my kind of music, but I knew I could learn a lot from Bruce. Though he was intrigued with the underground electronic scene, he didn't see a commercial future in it. None of those bands seemed to be getting signed up by major labels, whereas Bruce had an actual record contract with CBS, and they wanted him to go out on the road. He seemed to like my keyboard playing, so I joined his band and set about helping him put the rest of the band together. Richard Wernham was our drummer. He'd been in the Motors, who had a UK chart hit with a song called Airport. His girlfriend was a bass player who looked like Tina Weymouth. The lead guitarist, Dave Birch, was a childhood friend of Bruce's who idolized Mick Ronson from Bowie's band. Grinding on the low end of an amped up Les Paul and playing loud melodic solos with lots of vibrato. Bruce's songs were poppy and accessible, and his vocals were quite high and androgynous, a bit like Sparks. A good contrast to the grittiness of the band, I detected a rather twisted and perverse undercurrent. There was a hint of a disturbed childhood in songs like English Garden and Getaway William. My job was to add subtle textures with my synths to make the chords more peculiar. I saw a way to blend in some of the darker Germanic leanings of early electronic music with the irreverent energy of punk and goth. Hey, I found you again. Well, welcome back. I won't go to Walmart tonight. Well, is Walmart even open that late anymore? I don't know. Bruce's managers insisted his name had to be featured up front, so we became Bruce Woolley and the Camera Club. We met 4 nights a week in sweaty rehearsal joint until a railway arch in Tooting Beck. Bruce had received an advance from his deal with CBS Records, and his managers were advising him to invest in his future. So they put us each on a retainer of 40 quid a week. I felt like a professional musician and was able to start turning down sound mixing gigs when they clashed with rehearsals. We went over and over the songs, stopping and starting, fine tuning our parts, reworking intro riffs and breakdown sections, practicing vocal harmonies. During breaks, we went to the pub and got into heated debates about whether or not it was poofy to wear eyeliner on stage. We had a debut gig booked at the Marquee Club in Soho, a showcase for CBS's European convention. Some bigwigs from the USA were going to be there. Our drummer thought we should try to look hard, like the Clash or the Pistols. But David Birch said the English punk groups were all ripoffs of the New York Dolls and the MC5 anyway, and those guys were no strangers to the cosmetics counter. Wedged behind my keyboards at the back of the stage, it didn't really matter how I dressed, if I spiked my hair and dyed it green or left it lank and greasy. I still looked like a weedy little public school boy who'd crossed the tracks, which is exactly what I was. So I just lost myself in the music. I loved my micro moog. It could play only one note at a time, and I had a single oscillator and filter, but cranked up through a beaten Ampeg SVG bass amp, it sounded effing great. I learned to squeeze every last drop of expression out of it, which was not a lot. I was also practicing a wide asterisk leg stance so I could rock mechanically side to side like John Fox from Ultravox. Stances are everything to a synth player. I saw Bowie do a cameo with Iggy Pop at the Hammersmith Odeon once, playing a four-voice Oberheim. Oh, what I'd have given to get my hands on one of those beauties. And he had this great variation with one leg forward and one back. See what he did there? My only innovation was the fashion stake. In the fashion stakes was my national health glasses with a sticking plaster around the bridge. My dad was always breaking his specs and repairing them with elastoplast. Mine were broken, but I thought it was a cool look. The record label gave us the budget to have our own stage clothes made. We each got to design our own outfit with a seamstress in a workshop above Oxford Street. It was the end of the 1970s, and the punk street look seemed to be waning a little. Startling new bands like Spandau Ballet and Devo were more fashion conscious and sci-fi. After a lot of soul searching, I opted for a one-piece space cadet suit with plenty of zips. Bruce Woolley himself cut a fine figure at the microphone in a sort of Star Wars tunic, like an officer from the Death Star. We piled into the reclining aircraft seats of a splitter van and took off on tour around the provinces. We honed our sound in towns like Torbay and Milton Keynes and Abers, Aberystwyth. We checked into crummy suburban bed and breakfast with our guitar cases and garment bags, feeling very much like pop stars. Mm. We even played a handful of gigs, opening for XTC, by now signed to Richard Branson's label, Virgin Records. Did you hear like his wife died? Was it like last month? It was so sad. Like apparently they've been together for like a really long time and like before he was like so successful and he really loved her and it was so sad. I feel so bad for him. But I guess wow, they even had Virgin Records and in the 70s? I did not know that. But yeah, I mean, I think that he would have been gone with her around here. Like, yeah. Okay. Virgin believed they could turn one of the UK's most challenging new wave bands into a commercial success. Barry Andrews had left the band, but instead of replacing him with another keyboard player, they had brought in a second guitarist. The manic songs of theirs that I'd admired in the early punk days still worked pretty well, but I noticed a brand new member in their set called Making Plans for Nigel that sounded to me like an instant classic. Bassist Colin Moulding was singing the lead, and with Dave Gregory's guitar layered on top of Andy Partridge's, they'd settled on a more accessible mid-tempo sound that seemed a sure bet for the charts. When the record became a breakthrough hit for them a few months later, I was thrilled. There was something special about walking into Woolsworth and seeing the name of a band I'd once followed around the London pub circuit, now listed in the top 20. I still had Andy Partridge's home number in my phone book. I went to visit Colin Moulding and his girlfriend in a trendy pad in Chelsea that he'd actually paid for with money he made from pop music. Somehow the glass ceiling of pop stardom was shattered. It no longer seemed impossible that a band I was in could actually make the big time as well. Bruce Woolley had co-written a catchy song called Video Killed the Radio Star with his friends Trevor Horn and Geoff Downes, but they had their own band, the Bugles, and there was a race on to see who could get it released first. Our version was rockier, but lacking the refinement and finesse of Trevor's ingenious production. It stalled out in the lower UK charts, while the Bugles version got massive radio play and went straight to number one all over Europe. I now had the sensation of being tantalizingly close to a bona fide hit record. Though the Bugle's success meant a massive publishing windfall for Bruce, losing out to his old mates was a bitter pill to swallow, and it threw CBS Records and his management into a tailspin. When you have a hit, everyone slaps each other on the back, and no one stops to analyze what went right. When your record dies in a death, there's inevitably a post-mortem, and fingers begin to wag. The word that Bruce Woolley and the Camera Club were not poppy enough for the mainstream UK charts, yet weren't hip enough to be darlings of the indie music press either. There was only one thing for it: pack us off to America. During the winter of 1980, I toured the USA playing synth with Bruce Woolley and the Camera Club. We played clubs and small theaters. It was the beginning of a new British invasion, and the audiences went crazy. We were flown around from city to city, staying in rock and roll hotels like the Gramercy Park and attending frequent parties laid on by CBS Records. There was probably a huge shortfall to the tour accounts, but nobody questioned it. The cost would be reflected in Bruce's next royalty statements. It was all, oh no, I didn't know that. Yeah. Let me see. So I'm just curious. Oh, what is this? Yeah, they were together for 50 years. And she just died in November at the age of 80. Um, yeah. It's like for people in like the entertainment industry to be get together that long, like it's so rare. But um yeah, and yeah, he wrote it heartbroken to share that Joan, my wife and partner for 50 years, has passed away. Yeah. It's so sad. Anyway, it was all a little overwhelming for me, and at times I felt homesick. I would make expensive long distance calls back to England and spend hours chatting with Leslie Fairbairn. Leslie was always so good at grounding me. We'd become boyfriend and girlfriend in our mid teens, too young, really. Over the years, we went through phases of being a couple, followed by spells as friends. Though we came of age together, deep down, I don't think either of us believed it was a match made in heaven. But she was always my biggest supporter, organizing my stuff and contributing occasional silky backing vocals to some of my songs. I would call her from my US hotel rooms in the early hours when it was morning back in England. She listened patiently to my war stories from the road and was sympathetic up to a point. But when I complained about this and that, the endless waiting around in airport lounges or the annoying fans clamoring for photos, she said, "Oh, Tom, get a grip. You're a lucky man. Enjoy yourself." There were girls everywhere. There were girls in the dressing rooms, outside the stage door, and in the hotel lobbies. And one hotel we stayed at, the Tropicana in Hollywood, there were girls living as full-time non-paying residents, lying around the pool all day, just waiting for the next rock and roll band to check in. This was 1979, after all, post-pill but pre-HIV. I think you get the picture. Many of our US dates were in larger venues playing as a warm-up for Len Lovitch. Len was a UK-based Detroit transplant whose brilliant, quirky songs and whirling dervish stage antics had got her signed to Stiff Records. Her single, Lucky Number, reached the UK top 5 and was now making waves in the US dance and college charts. I watched Lynn from the wings each night, cooing and yelping her way through the fast-paced new wave set full of epic, heroic songs. She spun circles around the stage like Edith Piaf on crystal meth. The intro to her final songs was almost mystical. She stood motionless at the microphone in a narrow, revolving beam of light, fixing the audience with a mesmerizing stare, while a string of unearthly bird trills emanated from deep inside her throat, echoing around the hall. Lurking close by in the shadows was her partner and co-writer, Les Chappell. While Len was all frills, thick stage makeup, and outlandish home-sewn outfits, lace gloves, braided hair extensions, a mysterious mid-Atlantic accent, Les was just the opposite, with a black tracksuit, shaved head, and no eyebrows. He just stood there looking fit and taut, like a hip bouncer outside the Mud Club. I was in awe of them both. One night after a show in Seattle, I happened to find myself in the same hotel elevator as them, and I was overcome with shyness as the lift doors opened at their floor, Les turned to me and said quietly, "We caught Bruce's set tonight. Great synth parts. Len thinks you're a star." That night, I had a dream. Len and I were apartment hunting together in what felt like Paris or New York. We were viewing a large apartment, empty aside from a few cardboard boxes. It had grand high ceilings and two massive symmetrical rooms, each with a picture window facing the street at opposite ends. In the center was a partition with open double doors. Len was walking back and forth through the doorway from one room to the other, gazing around, looking quizzical. "I only see two rooms, but I sense there is another. There is a third room here, Thomas, but we can only see two." I set about writing Len a song. It's easy for a guitarist to write on the road, perched on the edge of a hotel bed with a steel string like Jagger and Richards. It's harder for a keyboard player because we need a lot more gear. You have this image of Joni Mitchell or Kate Bush finding her way into a darkened hotel ballroom and pulling the canvas off an antique Bosendorfer, but there were no Bosendorfers at the shitholes we stayed at, like the Cipriani and the Tropicana. I was just thinking that Taylor Swift song. Um, is it Cipriani that she's talking about when she's in this hotel? And Elizabeth Taylor, I cried my eyes out, Elizabeth, or no, cried my eyes violet. Sorry, I'm trying to type it. Elizabeth Taylor. Um, but no, because the whole point is she's at like a nice hotel in Italy, I think. That view of Portofino was on my mind when you called me at the Plaza Atene. Yeah, that's not Cipriani. I'm not trying to say like all Italian sounds the same, but in the song, I thought that was a bad. You know, I said to Veronica when she was here, she said something about cleaning the floor at their house with the Fabuloso. That was like all they had. It's like this Mexican brand. And I said, "Oh, I don't know, like that. I just think that anything that's not in English is fancy." So so that word sounds not English. So it sounds fancy because it's not English." She laughed. Tascam had just come out with a new recording device called a Portas Studio. It recorded on double speed cassette tapes using all four tracks so that you could keep overdubbing new parts. So I saved up my gig fees and $20 per diems and bought myself a Tascam Portas Studio. After shows, I had to wheel my keyboard flight case up to my hotel room. The rest of the band was usually down in the bar or taxiing off to some nightclub to pick up girls. But I would stay up late with my headphones on, working over song ideas. See, he has a crush. He's going to write her a song. See, this is what men used to do to woo women, to fluff their peacock feathers and write a poem, a sonnet. I don't know. Mm. I had a little Boss Dr. Rhythm drum machine, and I would program simple grooves and play or sing all the rest of the parts. After many nights of learning and experimentation, I was ready for Len to hear my song. It was called New Toy. I slipped a rough mix to Les in an envelope at the breakfast buffet one day, along with a letter to Len describing my dream. He thanked me for the tape, but he said Len was in bed sick with laryngitis and a fever. Later that day, I found out that the last few dates of the tour had been canceled and we were all taking an early flight back to England. Weeks passed before I heard from them. I tried to put it out of my mind. Then Len called me and said they wanted to meet. She never mentioned my dream, but she and Les loved the song, and she invited me to their rehearsal room in Kentish Town to try routining it with her band. They already had a piano and organ player, but there was a second keyboard rig set up. So I jammed with them on several of her songs, which of course I knew by heart. It felt good, really good, especially New Toy, which after all, I tailored to suit Len's voice and the players in her band. When Len and Les asked me to join the band, it felt like my career had just shifted up a gear. That evening, I called Bruce and told him I was leaving the camera club. He was sad and disappointed, but he wished me all the best. Bruce was always a good friend and boss, though I probably didn't acknowledge how much he had influenced me until many years later. We recorded and mixed New Toy in a single long day at a 16-track studio in Kentish Town. Les took it in to Stiff Records the next day, and they immediately picked it as Len's next single. A mere 2 months later, the record was released, and the same week it was added to BBC Radio's Radio One's A's one Radio One's A list. I began to hear my song coming from upstairs balconies and out of cars stopped in traffic jams. I wanted to lean my head in the car window and tell them I wrote that. My mom bought 20 copies of the single in her local record shop. Over the years, she bought at least 20 copies of each single I released, believing it would make a difference to the chart positions. The record shop assistants used to have a stack of them behind the counter ready for Miss Robertson when she walked in. My son's going to be a pop star, she told them. Sure enough, in May 1981, New Toy entered the lower reaches of the charts, and Len and her band were invited to perform on Britain's main music TV show, Top of the Pops. It was the first time my family had ever seen me perform. I have three brothers and two sisters, all older. I'm the youngest by 6 years. My mother and father both had respectable and successful teaching careers, but they loved children. The elder siblings were very academic, like their parents, the younger ones less so. I was the only one in the family to pursue a career in entertainment. Though we all appreciated music, there wasn't much participation in our household when I was growing up. My sister Lucy played the clarinet, and my brother Dominic was in a rock band when he was about 17. He had a Hammond B3 organ, and I remember sneaking into his room and firing it up when he wasn't around. I taught myself the intro to A Whiter Shade of Pale. I think my parents were initially quite disappointed that, though I was evidently bright like my siblings, I never really applied myself at school. They were relieved when I discovered that making music was something to sink my teeth into, and probably imagined when the phase passed, I would settle down to a normal job. Then, once my name started to show up in the papers and on the radio, my parents dined out on it among the Cambridge Dons and their spouses at the Trinity College high table. They would successfully recount the scholastic achievements of their older children, adding with a chortle, the young Tom's going to be on top of the pops this week. Legendary show. I know. I think I might look it up after this. We'll see. The New Toy. See if I can remember that. 1981. I was elated about my upcoming TOTP debut and called all my friends to let them know to be sure and tune in at 7:25 p.m. that Thursday evening. I decided this called for a brand new look. No more dowered goth. No more new romantic space cadet and eyeliner. I duly hit the local Oxfam thrift shop and picked out a nifty tan leisure suit, white shirt, and dark tie, and accessorized it with a crocodile belt and my national health glasses. While TOTP was the only live, quote, UK pop music show, music videos were just coming into vogue. If you had a video, your single could get more exposure via kids' TV
and breakfast talk shows. So, Stiff Records agreed to make a low budget video for New Toy. To save money, Stiff Records founder Dave Robinson decided to direct it himself. We had a single day to shoot it at a ritzy address in Regent's Park. On the morning of the shoot, I stepped out of a taxi with my garment bag, and as I reached the top of the stairs, my jaw dropped. It was the apartment from my dream. I had never been to a house as grand as this in London, which is why I'd assumed we were in Paris or New York. It was a chilly morning and you could see your breath. The crew was busy setting up cameras and lights. In the middle of the space, they were rigging a huge white tube made of parachute silk, brightly lit and blown open by giant fans, through which Len and the band were going to move while singing the song. This ethereal tunnel was the third room Len had sensed in my dream 6 months earlier. I've never had a supernatural experience before or since. I'm not that sort of person, and I don't possess those kinds of powers. Len clearly did. In time, I came to believe that this extraordinary dream had not come from my own subconscious. It came from Len's. I believed that for years, actually, right up until I wrote it down for this book. Now I realize the truth is obvious. Len picked out that location because it matched the one in my dream. Duh. New Toy was not a huge hit in the UK, but it made enough of an impact within the industry to get me noticed. And now that I'd pulled it off once, songwriting and recording didn't seem so intimidating. So I decided to use the little money I had left over from gigging to buy studio time and make a record under my own name. As a long shot, I put in a call to Andy Partridge from XTC to ask if he would help. To my amazement, he offered to take a train to London and co-produce my two new songs, Urges and Leipzig. A couple of weeks later, we completed them in a pokey 8-track studio in a back street near Gooch Street Station. Andy played bass drum and tambourine on the recordings and twiddled the knobs, but he refused to let me pay him. The studio owner introduced me to a music business lawyer called Tony Simmons. He was a diminutive man with a bald pate, whose dad had been a record industry big shot. He listened to my tapes and said he was fully confident he could get me a solo record deal. I was running really short of money again, but Tony offered to forego his fees for 3 months while he circulated the tapes to his contacts in the music industry. I agreed that if he was able to get me a record deal, I would either pay his fees or appoint him my full-time manager at 15% commission. Wheeling and dealing. We took the tapes to a few meetings at labels. Most turned us down, but A&M Records showed a lot of interest. This American-owned company, Tony assured me, was the perfect home for me because they were known to be especially supportive of developing artists like the Police, the band I'd seen that night at the Railway Arms in Putney, who were now filling sports arenas. Mm. Mm. Thank you, Tim. Going to listen at work tonight. Oh, thank you. 15% can turn into. Oh, thank you, Rob. Oh, Castle. I saw this interview like Oprah did with who's that ballerina? I have actually a book of hers, but it's that I had got at the thrift before. It's all pictures though, but it's a beautiful book. Um, what's her name? Mm. Misty Copeland. It was like a commercial, but it was the whole like interview. Anyway, it was interesting. But and she said to Misty something of how like a deal like she negotiated. I don't know how it was relevant to her story, Misty's. Maybe it'll come to me. But how Oprah said that because they didn't believe it was possible that she would get like, it was like if she gets so syndicated in like so many places or stations, then she would get 50% or something like crazy like that, right? And she said, I would never have gotten that deal if they believed it was possible. So like maybe it was like less for this, but if I get this many, and she got, obviously she has got a lot, but um, so if we got 15% could be a lot. 50%, she did really well. Okay, where were we? I seem to have a cozy rapport with my new record label friends. I would ride my bicycle every day the short distance to the A&M offices in Parsons Green to discuss plans for the release of Urges/Leipzig and the recording of my first solo album. It seemed to be taking an age for the contract to get done, but eventually Tony brought me to the final draft and a date was set on April 20th, 1981 for a signing ceremony at A&M, complete with press, photographers, and a lunchtime celebration. On the evening of April 19th, I got an angry call at home from a vice president of A&M. We refuse to be mugged, he said. The deal is off for good. There was no further explanation, and before I had a chance to ask questions, he hung up on me. There was no word from Tony Simmons for several days. It finally came in the form of a hand-delivered envelope under my front door. Inside was a typed invoice for £4,500 in respect of the deferred hours he'd spent working on my record deal. I immediately called Tony's voicemail and told him he was a fucking crook and he knew where he could stuff his invoice. This turned out to be a bad move because the next letter I got a week later was from a collection agency threatening legal action if I didn't pay. In the meantime, they informed me Tony had possession of my multi-track tapes for Urges and Leipzig, and I should consider myself prohibited from trying to offer the masters elsewhere. I couldn't believe I'd been betrayed like that, and I desperately wanted A&M to know that I had nothing to do with whatever it was Tony Simmons was trying to put over on them. Or perhaps they had just decided not to sign me after all and use Tony as a smokescreen. It made little difference either way. The fact was I was 22 years old and flat broke. I'd overextended myself on the new place, and I had no idea the next rent where the next rent check was going to come from. The small grubby boys playing in the street outside my house had seen me on TV and ran after me squealing, pop star, pop star. It felt like a taunt. Within a few days I came to a decision. I would sublet my Fulham flat to my friend Matthew Seligman, bass player with the Soft Boys, and get the heck out of London. In early May, I hitched a ride in a refrigerated chicken lorry and took the ferry across the English Channel. Arriving late at night in Paris with nothing but a small backpack and Joe Care's address on a scrap of paper. Oh, here we go. Chapter 3. Just sipping my coffee. Because sometimes you have like an idea that the end is coming. Because the page like ends a bit shorter. But it's like, no, here we are, chapter 3. This chapter is titled Needle Drop. What does that mean, needle drop? I mean, I'm not sure. Does that have to do with a record player? I don't know. DJing? Sounds like one of those weird shows you'd go to, Terry, where everyone in the audience is holding up a lighter or something. When J.O., was about 17, he was the epitome of coolness at our school. He drew subversive cartoons of the teachers. His hair length pushed the boundaries, and his boots had 3-inch heels. He played guitar. He had connections to shady characters in Kensington Market who could sell us Moroccan Hanish. I was a couple of years younger, closer in age to his brother, Tim. That the Carr brothers had a group called Amber Band that played occasionally at the end of term concerts or at the neighboring girls' school, and I was proud to be their roadie. Joe was a social magnet with a powerful ego. His lyrics and chord progressions showed a prodigious talent. He went on from school to Oxford, but he rejected the obvious career path, which would have been into the law, following his father, a high court judge. After graduating, he disappeared to the Mediterranean, where, while living like a hobo in a makeshift tent on a beach, he'd apparently had a vision. I was never clear what this vision was, but when I met up with him in Paris, the ego was gone, evaporated. He'd shed his skin and left it there on that beach amid the driftwood. Joe was crashing on a couch in a small apartment in Menilmontant in the 11th arrondissement in northeastern Paris. I turned up on his doorstep and followed him up a stairwell that reeked of urine and disinfectant as he punched the rubberized light switches on the landings. He showed me his room and made a space for me to lay out a sleeping bag. We sat at the kitchen table and caught up over a plastic bottle of supermarket red wine. Our experiences since the Amber Band days couldn't have been more different. While the lead singer was working in Paris as a street musician, his former roadie had been tasting the rock and roll lifestyle in the USA. Yet now here I was showing up at his hovel with my tail between my legs. Joe explained how the busking thing worked. You could just about manage to scrape a living provided you played by the rules. You needed to be up at the crack of dawn and set up in one of the central metro stations. If you weren't there by 7 a.m., you might not find a pitch. The French commuters didn't pay much, but around mid-morning, the tourists would start flowing through in big numbers. Since they were a lot more generous, he said if he could find me a guitar, we could work out some songs as duets, and we might make decent money. So the next day, we borrowed one of his neighbor Francis, and went about putting together a set. Paul Simon's songs worked well. Joe sang the lead, and I filled in gently with the Garfunkel harmonies. My guitar playing was, and still is, pretty rudimentary, but I knew the bar chords and could strum my way through most things. Plus, I had a good ear. We sat up all night working out standards by Bob Dylan, the Stones, Lennon, and McCartney. First thing the next morning, we headed out to see if we could sing for our breakfast. We took a shortcut through the vast cemetery of Père Lachaise with our guitar cases on our backs. The sun was just coming up, and scrawny cats and their feral kittens darted away among mossy headstones. Joe pointed out the famous tombs inscribed with names like Moliere, Chopin, Colette. There were graffiti arrows pointing to the shrines of Jim and Oscar. There's one supine statue whose sculpture carved the deceased exactly as he was in death. The arousal evident under the subject's tunic, oh my God, what? Led to him acquiring a reputation among childless Parisian women as something of a fertility symbol. He's mostly drab and green, but his crotch, as well as his nose and toes, are worn to a shiny bronze. Well, I mean, I guess that's one way to go, not the worst. In the metro station at Odeon, we looked for a suitable spot to pitch up. Joe talked me through his routine. We picked a straight section of tunnel with a sharp bend at the end, giving us a good 30 seconds of earshot with the oncoming pedestrians. We laid out a rug and two folding footstools to sit on, with a guitar case open in front and a few of our own coins and notes to get it started. We tuned up and launched into the boxer. I was pretty tentative at first, but I soon found my voice. After a while, the coins started clattering into the case. We rotated through our short set. You didn't really need an extensive song list. The biggest earner by far was Stairway to Heaven, especially popular with the Japanese, who would take endless photos with their canons and yashicas. I commented that we would probably have made the most money just looping Stairway to Heaven over and over. But Joe said he liked to keep it fresh. There was a limit to how much you had to suffer for your music. Busking was a great lesson in how to balance art and commerce. The equation was simple. If they didn't like what you sang, you went hungry. Sometime toward midday, Joe said we'd made enough and we should pack up and go get some lunch. Oh, thank you, Jerry. Pleasant to be. Oh, thank you. This became the pattern of our days. We'd keep an eye on the coins and notes dropping into the guitar case. On a good day, we could afford to stop around mid morning, whereas on a slow day, we wouldn't get to eat till early afternoon. This was in the days before buskers were properly licensed, and sometimes the police would come and move us on. Lay fleeks were known for their belligerence, and Joe said one policeman had broken a friend's guitar over his knee when he tried to sneak back to the same spot. A little old lady loaded with shopping baskets stopped to listen to us, smiling and tapping her foot along to Maggie May. When the song ended, she said, Les je ne sais, je l'aimais bien, votre chanson, j'ai pas d'argent, mais tenez chez chou-fleur, and she lumped a large cauliflower into Joe's guitar case. That must be the chauffeur. One time we were harangued by a gang of neo-Nazis from the National Front. It looked serious for a moment, but we placated them with high-speed version of Anarchy in the UK, and they pranced around in their jackboots before streaking off down the platform. Provided we made enough money, our lunchtime and afternoons were spent drinking and smoking in a bar on the Rue de Rivoli where all the buskers used to hang out. We met some real characters there from all over the world. English was the lingua franca, but many only spoke it by stringing together song lyrics. Some of the buskers were legendary. There was a 60-year-old Peruvian hippie called Pablo, who was reputedly the first to play the trains. Musicians were banned on the national rail system, but Pablo figured out you could bribe this one ticket conductor at the Gare de Lyon board the Marseilles Express. Work your way along the train a couple of carriages behind him, then lock yourself in the toilets for a few minutes before hopping on the return, arriving back in Paris by nightfall with 300 or 400 bucks in your pocket. Was train hopping. I gradually built up the courage to play solo without Joe's guidance and spent several months living this curious half life among the Paris buskers. Sometimes I would sleep late and go out to busk in the evenings in a restaurant called Les Tourneveurs on the Boulevard St. Michael Mitchell. It was there father that I met Elizabeth Almond. She was 21 and eating dinner with her father, a rich banker. I stood at their table and began to sing a ballad. I think it was Knights in White Satin. The father waved me away, but Elizabeth said, Non, papa, il est mignon, as she grabbed my elbow and told me to carry on. A few songs later, I had made my way to the other side of the restaurant, but I couldn't keep my eyes off Elizabeth. Her father paid the bill and got up to leave, but she wrote down her number on a matchbook and came over and stuffed it into the bridge of my guitar. Ah, romantic. We met the following afternoon for coffee. She was studying textile design at the Sorbonne. Her hair was short and tomboyish, but she had a beautiful wide smile and a lovely figure, and she spoke the most ridiculously bad English with a cartoon accent. Of course, I was completely smitten. We spent the last few nights of that humid summer under the sheets of Elizabeth's bed with a flashlight, making up fantastical children's stories in broken Franglish. But sadly, our love affair was not to last. I received a postcard from Matthew back in London saying that Mick Jones had been calling incessantly and wanted to book me for a keyboard session. I got pretty excited thinking this was the guy from The Clash, one of my favorite bands. I followed them from the early punk days as they became one of the top rock acts in the world. I had very happy memories of seeing them play a secret free concert on Christmas morning under the Westway overpass in West London when they tossed out all their leftover posters and t-shirts to the astonished crowd of a mere 80 or 90 fans. It wasn't that Mick Jones, it was the other one, the guitarist from Foreigner, whom I thought of as an American AOR rock group. Actually, the founders were Brits living in the USA, hence the name. I barely knew their music. Didn't they have a hit called Cold Blooded? But apparently their producer, Robert Mutt Lang, is that, yeah, Mutt Lang, that was Shania Twain's ex-husband who cheated on her. Had been sent my demo tape of Urges and Leipzig by his South African business partners in a tenacious UK-based music publishing company called Zomba. Mutt had immediately taken note of the keyboard playing and sounds and told Zomba to track me down. Their inquiries had led them to my flat sitter, Matthew. And Matthew contacted me at my forwarding address in Paris. On a long distance call from New York, where Foreigner were in the studio close to finishing their new album, Mutt said he wanted to try me out on their album and asked how soon I could be on a plane to the USA at their expense. He wondered whether $500 a day would work for me for a session fee. I flashed a quick glance at Elizabeth, who was down at the bottom of the bed, innocently sucking my toes. Well, Elizabeth, naughty girl. I thought about the paltry smattering of francs and centimes in the flap of my guitar case, and I told Mutt that once I wrapped a few things up in Paris, I could be there by, say Thursday. I told Elizabeth I was sure I'd be back in a few days. Quand je crois que non, but she said, but one day we will be the pirate twins again. She was quoting from one of our made up children's stories. When I touched down at JFK, there was a limo driver from the record company holding up a sign with my name on it. It was the first time this had ever happened to me. He drove me directly to Electric Lady Studios in Greenwich Village and said he would take the bags to my hotel in Central Park South. Feeling pretty spaced out, I was shown into the control room and introduced to Mutt Lang and Mick Jones. I had been in a couple of first class studios before, but only as an observer. This time, I was there as a hired musician. When Mick invited me out into the studio to jam with him a bit, my natural shyness overcame me. I completely froze. He had this guitar stack set up and a Fender Rhodes for me, but I could barely play a note. I could see Mutt listening in on us in the control room. They probably wondered what they'd let themselves in for. Mutt played me rough mixes of a few of the new songs. They were under the gun to get the vocals done so they could mix the album and deliver it to Atlantic. But Mutt said he was unhappy with the keyboard player they'd hired. He liked the synth sounds on my demos and he wanted to try out something similar. On the Foreigner tracks, Mutt asked me what I envisioned for synth parts, and I pulled out a laminated equipment list from Studio Instrument Rentals that looked just like a takeout food menu. He said he especially liked my song that went urges, urges, so I selected the synth I used on it, a Roland JP4. And when it showed up barely a half hour later, the roadie set it up in the control room, and I went about programming the same soft, slidey sound I used on my own song. With Mutt working the faders, I laid the first part down, and it sounded great. Mick Jones bobbed around snapping Polaroids of my bespectacled reflection in the chrome side panels of vintage tube compressors. A little later, Lou Graham showed up, ready to lay down a lead vocal. Mutt suggested I must be tired, and why didn't I go get some shut-eye? I could return to the studio in a few hours when they wrapped up the vocals. I said that would be around 3 or 4 a.m. He said, yes, there would be a relief sound engineer who would tell me how many tracks I could fill up, and I could rent any keyboard on the list. SIR was open all night. They would be back in the morning to listen to what I'd done. As I left, I heard Lou start to warm up for his lead vocal. The chorus sounded a little familiar. Urgent, urgent. Uh-oh, what's going on? That night, I was like a kid in a candy store. The best studio I'd been able to afford to date was a semi-professional 8-track demo joint. Now I was alone in the control room of a world-class professional studio, in the very seat where Jimi Hendrix must have sat to record his immortal solos on Electric Ladyland. It had a beautiful Neve 8078 mixing desk with automated faders, and there against the back wall were not one but two Studer A80 24-track tape machines. Smacking my lips, I picked up the phone to SAIR and ordered up a brand new Prophet 5 synth and a vintage mini Moog. I told the engineer to load up the ballad Mutt had played me called Waiting for a Girl Like You. He had asked me to perform and re-record the descending ostinato line that opened the song. It wasn't sitting well with the rest of the song, and the previous keyboard player had just hadn't nailed it. It took me an hour to find some richer and more evocative sounds and replace all the original keyboard parts. But then I had this idea I'd always wanted to try out. There's a classic electric keyboard called the Mellotron, made famous by the Beatles, who got into it during their drug-inspired period and used it all over songs like Strawberry Fields Forever. Each key you press on the Mellotron's keyboard triggers a tape of a single note, recorded from a classical instrument, such as flute or cello. I've never gotten my hands on a mellotron personally, but I had this theory that you could emulate its psychedelic effect by recording single notes of a synthesizer on consecutive tracks of a multi-track tape. Then playing the faders on a mixing console to create chords and harmonies. So I went through about 10 tracks of the multi-track, recording a sustained note on each using the rented mini Moog in the scale of A minor. I then ran the multi-track using my fingers to slide faders up and down in waves, recording the combined output to a stereo tape machine. The result was ethereal and very spacey. I had the engineer add around 30 seconds of blank tape to the start of Waiting for a Girl Like You, and we laid in my new intro. When the downbeat hit, my intro segged perfectly into the ostinato, and the overall effect was unbelievable. Mutt and Mick showed up around 11 a.m., this time with the rest of the band and their manager, Bud Prager, in tow. They were eager to hear what I'd done with the intro to the ballad. We darkened the lights, and I proudly signaled the engineer to roll the song up as far as the vocal entry. The master fader was pulled down, and there was a long pause. Finally, the bassist, Rick Wills, said, "What would you call that stylistically?" Dennis Elliott, the band's Cockney drummer, said, "It's sort of like massage music, isn't it?" "Core, I could really use a massage, actually," said Rick. "Hey, bud, can we get some Asian girls in?" Oh my God. I need this for my aughts. Mm. Mick and Mutt were really into my massage music, though, and the occasional Spinal Tap moment aside, I spent a very productive month working with them to put my synths all over their album, leading Mutt to give me a new nickname, Booker T. Boffin. The first part was a reference to the great Hammond player Booker T. Jones, who scored the massive jukebox hit with Green Onions with his band, the MGs. The T was for Thomas, and a boffin in the UK is a geek who tinkers around and invents things. Have you heard that before, Terry? Boffer? You're kind of a buffer, aren't you, Terry, actually? When I think of it, with your planes. I gained the utmost respect for Mick Jones, a thoroughly decent bloke, as well as for Mutt Lang's amazing production skills. Mutt had already had a lot of commercial success, producing bands like Graham Parker and The Rumor, the Boomtown Rats, and AC/DC. I've never worked with a more fastidious producer. He would make me go over and over my parts, adjusting the inflections on every single note until it was exactly perfect. Some simple strings of notes took hours and hours to record. Yet, when he brought in sax legend Junior Walker for a solo on Urgent, and recorded at least a dozen versions, Mutt had the wisdom to recognize that the very first solo Junior blew, rough edges and all, was the take. He could spend hours hunched over the faders, then sit back and listen to the song from the top, as if it were the very first time he'd ever heard it. He could transform himself at will into a fanboy. I was sharing a hotel suite with Mutt, and often he'd get up and leave before me in the morning to work a 20-hour shift in the studio, not arriving back until after I'd gone to bed. He would then sit cross legged on his bed with an acoustic guitar, singing his own songs in a high, shaky voice with Van Morrison like inflections. He worked every single day during the month I was in New York, aside from one morning when he had to make an emergency visit to the dentist to deal with a toothache that prevented him from working. On one occasion, halfway through a mix, he suddenly looked up and said, "What the fuck are we doing indoors on a beautiful day like this?" He ordered up a big stretch limo and we piled into it to head off to Central Park, stopping only at FAO Schwartz to buy a selection of frisbees. We ran around for a few moments tossing frisbees, but after less than 5 minutes, Mutt said, "What the fuck are we doing at the park? We've got an album to mix." And we all piled back into the limo. Late one night, as I was working on my keyboard parts, there was a strange banging noise from behind the speakers. Suddenly, an axe came smashing through the studio wall, followed by a troop of the campiest Greenwich Village firemen you've ever seen, decked out in their protective suits, boots, and yellow helmets. It turned out that at the weekly midnight screening of the Rocky Horror Picture Show at the 8th Street Cinema next door to Electric Lady, an audience member had accidentally set a seat cushion on fire during a lighter waving sing along anthem. It had been smoldering for hours until someone on the street spotted smoke and summoned the fire department, who duly smashed through the shared wall in an effort to locate the source. I believe if you listen closely, there's an interesting sound effect mixed into the background of Jukebox Hero. At our agreed daily rate, I ended up being owed $6,500 for my month's work with Foreigner. On the last day, Bud Prager sat me down in his office and asked if that was too much for a virtually unknown 22-year-old to earn. "Absolutely not," I said. "If anything, they were getting a bargain." He laughed and pulled a fat brown envelope out of his desk drawer with a wad of $100 bills in it. "It's all there," he said. "I trust you," I replied. And that night, I flew back to the UK in economy, determined to use the cash to make an album of my own. It felt strange to be back in London after the experiences of Paris and New York. Nothing about the place had really changed. Yet I felt as if I'd been away a lifetime. Matthew had the flat looking nice for me, and I collapsed into bed and slept for about 15 hours. He woke me up with a cup of tea. Sitting on my bed, he told me that the independent label Armageddon which had released his band, the Soft Boys Records, was interested in releasing Urges slash Leap Seek as a single. I called the label boss, Richard Bishop, an amiable young businessman with a good ear for electric music. Later that day, I rode my bicycle over to his office. Because Armageddon was a small label, he said it could turn a single around very fast. If we could agree on a deal that week, he could have it pressed and in the shops within 6. He showed me a form contract he'd used with another band and said if it worked for me, he would get a new one typed up. The advance was only £1,500, but the royalty rate was very fair. So if it did well, I would see a decent return, and there were no renewal options. I was reluctant to use a lawyer because I didn't want anyone in the legal world to know about the deal in case of it got back to Tony Simmons, who still reckoned he controlled the rights to my recordings. The single came out in early 1981 and got great reviews from the usually snooty British music press. Several of the reviewers mentioned my work with Len Lovitch, and the one in the trade, Rag Music Week, also plugged my work on the upcoming Foreigner album. My single made zero impact on the pop charts, but within the industry, I was starting to make some serious waves. Matthew had set aside a stack of mail for me. One letter was from Tony Simmons, and it was surprisingly friendly. It took me a while to swallow my pride and call him. He was willing to overlook the unpaid invoice and felt we should sit down and plan a new strategy for getting me signed to a major record company. I was still feeling pretty pissed off, and I was cautious about approaching major labels after the A&M debacle, but I thought I should hear what he had to say. I needed a lift home from the dentist after an operation to take out my wisdom teeth. I knew I would be too dozy from the anesthetic to make it home on the underground on my own. Tony offered to pick me up in his plush Bentley, and he treated me with kindness and consideration. I'd been planning to make him tell me what really happened on that last day before the A&M signing party, but I decided to let it go. I was thinking to myself, so what if Tony got too greedy and blew the deal? Everyone makes mistakes. And in a weird way, the whole Paris, New York episode might never have happened had A&M stuck to the plan. Perhaps it was in the car, or perhaps it was the medication, but by the time he dropped me off at home in Fulham, he'd persuaded me to give it another try with him. We talked again the following day while Tony felt the timing was now good to go straight to the major labels. I had a different suggestion. I said it was crazy to look for a deal before they really heard what I was capable of. I could use the cash I made from Foreigner to record the album myself and then approach the majors with a proposal for a distribution only agreement, with me retaining ownership of the masters. The other advantage of doing it that way was I could work on my live performances, play some clubs around London, and build up a grassroots following prior to the album coming out. Tony saw the wisdom in this, and I think he was impressed. We agreed that this time out there would be no per hour fees, but that he would become my lawyer and manager for 2 years in return for a 15% commission on everything I earned during that period. Mutt Lang's business partners in London were Clive Calder and Ralph Simon, a pair of South African expatriates who had set up a music publishing company called Zomba and a recording studio complex in the northwest London backwater of Willesden. They invited me to tour their studios and talk to me about my songwriting. I didn't have the highest regard for most music publishers, who seemed to me to be lazy and lethargic, just sitting back, reaping their share from statutory copyright royalties. But Clive and Ralph were different. On Clive's desk was a copy of the latest Music Week. The words copyright control was circled in marker. I asked what that meant, and Clive explained it was an indication that no publisher was assigned to that particular composition. He would make a point every week of tracking down the songwriters and making them an offer to administer their publishing at a much better rate than the so-called majors. I suppose it was naive of me to imagine that no one else had thought of this idea, but the impression I got from my songwriter friends was that most of music publishers were pretty dense. Zomba was a rare exception. Clive and Ralph were keen to expand and told me of their plans to release themed compilation records on their own label. The idea was to find a TV celebrity, such as the news anchor Angela Rippon, and persuade her to be the front cover or on the front cover of an album of keep fit tracks or soothing baby lullabies. Zomba would license one well-known hit song, e.g., Let's Get Physical by Olivia Newton-John, and fill in the rest of the album with generic original tracks written by their own staff writers and recorded in their studios. Clive and Ralph were also very excited about a new genre of music coming out of the New York club scene known as rap, and determined to put together a rap group themselves, forming a rap-oriented record label that they would run from their offices in London. Though Zomba's artistic aspirations were questionable, their business acumen was rock solid, and they'd picked up an understanding of the music of the streets at the house parties and high life jam sessions in the way in the Johannesburg projects. It was quite plain to me that these guys were way smarter than anyone else around and the kind of people I needed in my corner. So Tony Simmons negotiated a limited term publishing agreement with Zomba, and this gave me additional cash and resources to launch my solo career. My first project with Zomba was a rap slash dance record called Magic's Wand. I built up the groove and chord sequence in late night sessions in their Williston studios, and the backing tracks were sent to the USA, where a pair of black college graduates called Whodini added a rap. It became the first ever release on Zomba's US-based Jive Records label and topped the Billboard DJ Dance charts, becoming the first Rap 12 ever to sell 1 million copies. The royalties from that one record repaid the entire advance Zomba had given me on signing the deal. Not bad going for an English geek and a bunch of South African cowboys. Many years later, Zomba exercised a buyout obligation in their contract with distributors BMG and sold them to the Jive label for $2.74 billion, a sum arguably equal to the value of the entire record industry at that time. I needed a new HQ, somewhere I could be left alone to write songs for my own album, hone my one-man band sound, and work up a killer live act. In late December, I found it in an old Victorian industrial estate just off the railway tracks near Earl's Court. The rent was very cheap because you had to walk through a meatpacking plant to get to it. Once inside, you found yourself in a splendid top-floor loft with brick walls and arched windows, looking down on railway sidings covered in snow, like a scene from post-World War II Eastern Europe. As a bonus, the huge cast-iron gates of the estate were locked every night at 10 p.m., and if you were still inside at that time, they wouldn't let you out until 8 the next morning. This would be the perfect isolation I was looking for, right in the heart of London. I set up my gear in the loft and got right to work. In the early hours of the second night, I was startled by a knock at the door. I thought I was alone in the building. I cautiously opened the door and found myself chest height to an enormous Canadian. He had long hair, a bushy beard, and a checked shirt like a lumberjack. "Hi," came the booming, friendly voice. "I'm Ivan." He looked a lot like Rasputin, the Mad Monk. Ivan was a hacker, though in those days the term had probably not yet been coined. He had one of the workshops down the hall from mine. It was full of welding equipment, partially dismantled shortwave radio sets, and the hulks of obsolete mainframe computers. He'd heard noises coming from my loft and came to see who or what was behind them. Ivan could take anything apart, that was for sure. Whether or not he could put it back together remained to be seen. But I took him under my wing, or was it the other way around? And over the next few months, he became my roadie, computer boffin, and IT guy rolled into one. My song started to take shape. I had no single theme in mind, but as I added more and more to my set, jotting lyrics down on random pieces of paper, coming up with improbable electronic grooves that incorporated the curious machinery Ivan soldered together for me, it seemed to be moving into a sort of post apocalyptic reverie, a parallel universe. I would look out over the snow covered railway tracks and imagine how London might have turned out if one of the many threatened invasions of our island had been successful. I imagined living under a repressive regime where free speech was prohibited and everything rationed. Would there be a resistance movement, a secret society of free thinking artists and writers lurking in the ruins of abandoned factories? Of course there would, and I would be the one to write their anthems. On January 19th, 1981, I sketched a rough idea for the cover of my first album. The picture was of me at the bench of my workshop tinkering with some mysterious invention. It was in the style of a boy's own comic, but the title was Wireless Weekly. This was the running order as listed on the back side. Number 1, Radio Silence. 2, Flying North. 3, Europa and the Pirate Twins. 4, Pedestrian Walkway. 5, Urges. 6, Leipzig is Calling You. 7, Wind Power. 8, Airwaves. 9, Weightless. If I had stopped for a second to reflect on the fact that my obsessions with science fiction, ham radio, and the Cold War might prove a little unsuitable for the delicate pop sensibilities of the mass record buying public, I'd have chosen a different path. I could have written catchy songs about jealousy and teenage angst. I might have joined the ranks of the smiley poster boy singers of the early 1980s, got my hair cut at Antenna, and bought my clothes on South Moulton Street. But when I turned on BBC Radio 1 or watched Top of the Pops, there was nothing, absolutely zero, that appealed to me. The idea of adding to the general chorus of syrupy pop chatter and unrequited love songs filled me with loathing. I was determined to go full on with my own peculiar brand of diesel punk music and visuals. And if I couldn't crack the big time, I would go down behind enemy lines in a blaze of glory. London in 1981 was a state of flux. After the violence of the anti-police riots in Brixton during the spring, the city streets were quickly cleaned and scrubbed to prepare for the wedding of Prince Charles to Diana Spencer. Their smiling faces were appearing on biscuit tins and knitted tea cozies. By the summer, there were flags and banners hanging out of every window. On the rare days when the sun came out, Londoners stopped whatever they were doing to go to sit in the park with a pint of beer, getting sunburned. It was as if the civil unrest had been swept under the carpet, but there was still a lingering sense of uneasiness. Was that 1981? I always thought it was like later in the 80s. Does that like start the 80s? I wonder what it'll be to start like the 2030s. I know we're a long way away, but hopefully we'll be on a good note. We're only midway through here. a royal wedding. Over 12,000 in jail for mean tweets. Is that true? Well, that's really true. Last days of disco. Yes, Donna Summer. But there was still a lingering sense of uneasiness. This was the backdrop to my first attempt at a live one-man show. I had no reputation yet as a live act. Few people had heard of me, but Tony and I managed to get bookings at a handful of small London venues, including a couple where I had previously mixed sound for other bands. Performing on stage with my fragile electronic rig was precarious. Even with Ivan on hand with his voltmeter and duct tape, the early performances were a mixed bag. Being the front man and center of attention was new to me. When everything went smoothly, I felt relaxed and sang well into my headset microphone, swapping hands between my Simmons percussion pads and the keyboards of two synths. The core of my setup was a PPG 340/380 Wave computer of German origin that had originally been designed to control Tangerine Dream's light show. I had it hooked up to play my bass and drum grooves. It could only handle one song at a time, meaning there was an enforced gap between each number in the set. Starting a new song required me to insert a pair of microcassettes into the PPG and type load on the command line of its green screen. The load time was exactly 52 seconds, after which there was about an even chance that the sequence would play. So I got pretty good at telling stories in the chunks of 52 seconds. I would explain how the different bits of my equipment worked, or tell the audience the background to each song. Many of my lyrics were set in a kind of dystopian parallel universe. In ruined cities like Leipzig and Budapest, I've created mythical heroic characters like Europa and Caroline 452. I began to notice that one or two people would be in the front row at every gig, dressed up like the characters in my songs. The arrangements were very mathematical, blending the hypnotic pulsing sequences of Kraftwerk and Edgar Froese with longer soaring melodies and unusual jazzy harmonies. Behind me was a parabolic video screen showing montages of billowing cumulonimbus clouds, cells dividing in petri dishes, and cheerful factory workers building Spitfire fuselages. I'd say the audiences that stumbled into those small London pubs and clubs were a little perplexed. They knew they were seeing something wildly experimental and ahead of its time, but a Thomas Dolby gig wasn't exactly a toe-tapping night out. What it did do was give me a chance to try out my songs on a real audience before going to the studio to record my first album. In an odd way, tucked away in the corners of those little clubs, I felt I was busking again, singing for my supper, for an unknown audience to appreciate my unusual lyrics and melodies. The first time around, I had to learn to project myself, to try and cast a spell and reel them in. As a performer, your consciousness is often in two places at once. Even before you get to the applause, you always have a sense of how your song is going over. Some parts don't work out the way you expect, so you make small changes the next time around until you get it right. One night I played a simple ambient piano improvisation at the end of Airwaves and randomly twiddled a knob on my micro moog as if tuning a radio dial. It created an effect that was solemn and desolate, but somehow very beautiful. At the next night's gig, that section duly became integrated as the intro to the song. The audience was mesmerized. When you make minor gains like that at concerts, you take them into the studio with you, and it makes your album that much stronger. I recorded most of the golden age of wireless in a basement studio in Barnes belonging to a Greek South African named John Kangos. Leslie Fairbairn was now working in as his studio manager, and I got a great discount on the hourly rate. enabling me to work there for 2 or 3 weeks. I brought in Len Lovich's rhythm section and a brilliant guitarist named Kevin Armstrong to replace some of the electronic grooves with a more organic rock sound. We tried working with a producer called Wally Brill, but after a couple of days, I think it was plain to both of us that I needed to be in control myself. Was I a bit of a diva, a brat? Maybe just a little, but it was really about knowing precisely what I wanted, being willing to strive for something unique and individualistic at the risk of making my own mistakes. All right, I think we'll pick it up here tomorrow. These are longer chapters than the last books. So I feel like this is a good stop point and time. Mhm. So he is say my belt there. Working on his music. Um, I was gonna say he's been signed. Well, he's kind of hasn't really been signed. So because I do see like the next page over in the big letters like EMI, and that's what I remember from that video that I sent you guys was him saying about releasing that Blinding Me with Science with EMI. So I was waiting to hear EMI, because didn't he say EMI was his label? Like, but then I thought maybe it was changed back. They changed names at some point. I didn't know. But then I heard that I saw that in the next page. I'm like, okay, so we're gonna get to Blood and Me with Science tomorrow. And I will let you know. Oh, thank you guys. I will let you know how it goes. Like tomorrow. Going back to the hospital, her coming over, like, but at least I have a plan. So I think maybe I'll sleep better tonight. And I just need some days of calm like this. I need to calm, like get my senses together. So your body, it really does a number. Um, I said that Terry once, it was like you have your planes and motorcycles and vacations every week. That's just a you thing. And he was like, well, what's a you thing? And I said, first thing I thought, I said, safety. Because that's not what I've been feeling. But if I could feel safe, um, I find that like more healing for me, I guess. As I don't get to feel like as safe as I think is I should for like a health, Um, but I'd like that. But anyway, I'm hoping some days of feeling is safer for a bit now that I'll regain more of my health back. Because this terror is so hard to live with, like as time drags on, feeling like in this. But anyway, a little better today. Should be better tomorrow. I'm sorry of how I've been. It's been very difficult, but thank you for sticking with me. I love you so much. I'll try to a little better for you. Good night.